Toast didn't start cruel. It started warm. My son-in-law's father was at the microphone, talking about family, about roots, about how a house becomes a home when the right people fill it. He had a nice voice, the kind that makes a room lean in. I remember thinking, this is going fine. This is actually going fine. Then my stepdaughter stood up to say a few words of her own. She smiled at the crowd the way she always smiled when she had something planned. Wide, slow, waiting for silence before she used it. She thanked her mother. She thanked her grandparents. She thanked friends who'd flown in from 3 different states. And then she turned toward me, just slightly, with that same smile still on, and said, "And of course, my stepfather, he's always there in the background, kind of like the furniture." The room laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, the kind that travels from table to table because people decide it's safe to join in. I looked at my wife. She was smiling. Not proudly, not deliberately, just enough to let me know she wasn't going to stop it. That was the moment, not the joke. The smile. I've been in this family for 11 years. I know the difference between teasing and permission. What I saw on her face was permission. I should tell you something about the house first, because it matters. The party was at my stepdaughter's new home, a 4-bedroom colonial in a suburb 40 minutes outside of Columbus. Good school district, big yard, the kind of place young couples pin on mood boards for years before they can actually afford it. She and her husband couldn't afford it either, not on their own. 2 years ago they came to me with the numbers. They were $47,000 short on the down payment. Her husband's family had contributed what they could. My wife was between jobs. They'd looked at smaller places, starter homes, but my stepdaughter had a specific vision, and her mother had spent 3 weeks telling me this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, that the market was only going up, that family helps family. I wrote the check. $47,000. No contract, because my wife said a contract would feel cold. No timeline for repayment, because my wife said that would feel like a transaction. Just a transfer from my savings account into theirs, with a note that said, "For your future." That was 2 years ago. The housewarming party was last Saturday. The house looked exactly like you'd expect from someone who'd planned every inch of it for years. Fresh paint in colors that had names like warm linen and sea glass. New furniture still carrying that faint off-gassing smell that costs extra. A catered spread along one wall. Drink station near the back door that opened onto a deck we'd all helped them stain the previous summer. About 60 people. Her friends, her husband's family, a few neighbors she'd already made an impression on. My wife's sister and her husband, a couple I recognized from her college years. I'd driven 3 hours to be there. Took a Friday off work. Carried trays in from the caterer's van because the young man they'd hired to help had called out sick, and someone needed to do it. That's what I mean about the furniture. You don't notice furniture, but when it's gone, the room feels wrong. My stepdaughter's comment landed to laughter, and she moved on to the next thing she wanted to say, riding the warmth of the room. I stood near the kitchen doorway and let the sound wash over me. I've spent 11 years learning how to stand in a room that isn't quite mine. I know how to go still, in a way that looks like calm. But I notice things. I always notice things. It's what I did for 30 years in facilities management. You learn to watch the margins, the places where problems start before anyone else sees them. I saw my wife's sister catch her husband's eye and look away quickly. I saw my stepdaughter's husband glance in my direction once and find something interesting on the floor. I saw my wife's mother nod approvingly at the joke, the way someone nods when they finally hear something they've been thinking for a long time. I excused myself to use the restroom, and I stood there for a moment with the door closed and the fan running, and I thought about the $47,000. Here's what I want to be honest about, because I think people in my position don't always say it plainly. I didn't write that check reluctantly. I wrote it because I wanted them to have the house. I wanted to give my stepdaughter something solid. I'd spent years trying to find the right way to be useful to a family that already had its shape before I arrived, and money was the one thing they'd always let me offer without argument. I don't think that was wisdom on my part. I think it was a mistake I made slowly. One reasonable decision at a time. When you pay for things, people stop noticing you paying. The payment becomes the relationship, and then one day you're furniture. I washed my hands and went back out to the potty. I didn't make a scene. I want to be clear about that, because I know how these stories can go when people picture an angry man demanding credit for his generosity. That's not what happened. What happened was quieter, more like watching a door close slowly. I found my way to the drinks table. My wife's brother-in-law, a quiet man named Ray who worked in insurance and had always been decent to me, was standing there refilling his cup. He didn't say much, but after a moment he said, "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. He nodded once. That was a lousy thing to say. 2 sentences. That was it. But they mattered to me more than I could explain in that moment, because they were the first honest words I'd heard all evening. My wife found me about 10 minutes later. She came up beside me with her hand on my arm and her voice low. She didn't mean it the way it sounded. How did she mean it? It was just a little joke. You know how she is. I looked at her. I know exactly how she is. She flinched, not much, just enough. Don't make this a whole thing. I'm not making it anything, I said. I'm standing here, drinking water. She searched my face for something. An argument to manage, maybe. I didn't give her one. I finished my water and set the cup down and went to help bring in the dessert trays that were still in my car, because no one else had remembered they were there. The drive home was quiet for 40 minutes. My wife looked out the window. I kept my hands on the wheel and thought about what I was going to do. I want to explain what I mean by that, because it's important. I'm 63 years old. I spent my working life making sure large buildings didn't fall apart. I understand systems. I understand that nothing is accidental, that what you see on the surface is almost always the result of choices made further back and further down. The joke at the party wasn't an accident. It was comfortable. My stepdaughter said it the way you say something you said before in smaller rooms, something that got a laugh at the dinner table, or in a text thread, and finally felt ready for a bigger audience. That takes time to build. That takes people agreeing, privately, over months and years, that the joke is fair. My wife didn't start that agreement, but she'd never stopped it. When I got home, I went to my office and sat at my desk in the dark for a while. I wasn't angry. I want to be careful about that word, because what I felt wasn't hot. It was cold and very clear, like water that's been still long enough to show you the bottom. I opened my filing cabinet and found the folder I'd kept. I keep folders for everything. Old habit. Inside were the bank transfer confirmations, the text messages where my wife had relayed the request, a few emails from those early weeks when we'd been working out the logistics. $47,000. Documented. Clear. I took photos of each page with my phone. Not to threaten anyone, because I'd learned that night what my role was in that house, and I wanted to know what I had to work with going forward. The call came Tuesday morning. My stepdaughter's husband. I was surprised. He's a man of few words, in the best of circumstances, and we'd never had what I call a real conversation. But he asked if I had a few minutes, and I said yes, and he said he wanted to apologize. Not for her, for himself. I saw your face when she said it, he told me. I should have said something right then. I didn't, and I've been thinking about that since Saturday. I didn't know what to do with that for a moment. It's a strange thing being seen by someone you'd half assumed didn't notice you. I appreciate that, I said. She doesn't think she did anything wrong, he said. I want you to know that's something we're going to have to work through. I can't promise you anything about how that goes. But I wanted you to know where I stood. After we hung up, I sat there thinking about what kind of man he was, how he'd chosen to call me on a Tuesday morning before he had to, when he didn't have to, when there was no one watching and nothing to gain from it. That told me more about him than 3 years of holiday dinners ever had. My wife asked me that Thursday if we could talk. We sat at the kitchen table. She had coffee. I had the folder in front of me, closed. I want to understand what you're feeling, she said. That was always how she started hard conversations, not, I'm sorry, not I was wrong. I want to understand what you're feeling. It put me in the position of explaining my emotions rather than her examining her choices. I'd sat with that pattern for a long time without naming it. I named it now. I don't need you to understand what I'm feeling, I said. I need you to tell me if you think what she said was acceptable. She was. She was nervous. She gets silly when she's nervous. She wasn't nervous. She was performing. There's a difference. My wife looked at the folder. What's that? Documentation, I said. The down payment? The transfers? The timeline? She went quiet. Not the defensive quiet I expected. Something slower, heavier. I know what you gave us, she said finally. I know you know, I said. What I don't know is whether it mattered. She looked up at me, and for the first time in that conversation, maybe in many conversations before it, she didn't reach for the next thing to say. It mattered, she said quietly. Then why were you smiling? The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of things she didn't have words for yet. Or maybe things she'd had words for privately, but had never said to me. I didn't want to make a scene, she said. So you made me the joke instead. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, something in her face had shifted. That's not fair. I know it's not, I said. That's kind of the whole point. I want to tell you about something that happened 3 days after that conversation. My wife's mother called me. She never calls me. We don't have that kind of relationship. She called my wife's number for 11 years and found reasons to be busy when I answered. She called my cell phone on a Sunday afternoon. I want to say something, she said. Her voice was stiff, the way voices get when someone has rehearsed a sentence and is determined to get through it. What Renee said at the party was inappropriate. I may have encouraged certain attitudes over the years that made that feel acceptable. I'm not saying I did everything wrong, but I want to say that part plainly. It wasn't an apology. Not really, but it was the closest thing to accountability I'd heard from that side of the family in 11 years, and I understood what it cost her to make the call. Thank you, I said. I mean that. After she hung up, I sat on the back porch with my coffee and thought about what changes in people and when, and why it sometimes takes an entire family to feel a floor shift before anyone stops walking. My wife and I spent the following weeks in a kind of careful honesty I don't think we'd practiced before. Not therapy, just talking. Real talking. The kind where you don't know how it's going to end when you start. We talked about the money, yes, but more than the money. We talked about what the money had been standing in for. The approval I'd been trying to buy without knowing it. The belonging I'd been trying to earn. The way I'd made myself useful because useful felt like enough. It wasn't enough. That was the thing I'd finally stopped pretending. My wife cried during one of those conversations. Not dramatically, just quietly. The way you cry when you're not grieving something lost, but something you realize you wasted. I let it go on too long, she said. I told myself it was easier. It wasn't easier. It was just easier for me. That mattered more to me than any apology could have. We didn't fix everything in those weeks. I don't think you fix things like that. You adjust to the truth of them, and you decide what to do with what remains. What remained was a marriage I wasn't ready to leave, and a wife who was, finally, looking at things clearly. My stepdaughter called me in early November. I wasn't sure she would. Her husband had told me in one of our few subsequent conversations that she was working through some things, and I'd taken that to mean she might get there eventually or might not, and either way I was done waiting for it. But she called. She didn't do the thing I expected, which was explain the joke or soften it or reframe it into something I'd misunderstood. She just said, I want to say I'm sorry. Not because Mom asked me to, because I've been thinking about it. And I think I've been treating you like a resource for a long time, and telling myself that was fine because you never said it wasn't. I held the phone and listened. You never said it wasn't, she said again. And I let that be my permission. That was wrong. There are moments where you realize the person you've spent years trying to figure out has finally handed you something true. You don't know quite what to do with it. You don't want to close your hand too quickly in case it disappears. Thank you, I said. That means something to me. We talked for another 20 minutes, not about the money, about ordinary things, about her garden, which she'd started in the backyard of the house, about her project at my job, about a movie she'd seen, the kind of conversation I'd never been able to have with her in 11 years because there was always too much unspoken underneath it. When we hung up, I went for a walk. The neighborhood was quiet. The leaves were mostly down. The air had that particular quality of a late fall afternoon where the light looks like it knows it's about to be gone for a while. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be clear about that. I didn't feel like anything had been won. I felt like something that had been crooked for a long time had been nudged slightly toward true. That's a different feeling. Less dramatic. More durable. I haven't brought up the $47,000 again. I don't know if I will. That's not because I think it doesn't matter, or because I'm performing magnanimity. It's because right now the money is less important than the fact that we've all stopped pretending. Pretending was what made me furniture. Not the money. Not the jokes. The long-practiced agreement to act like nothing needed to be said. I'm 63 years old. I don't have an unlimited number of years to spend in rooms where I'm background noise. I know that now in a way I didn't let myself know it before. What I want, going forward, is simple. I want to be spoken to like a person. I want my name said at my own table without the pause that comes before a punchline. I want my wife to look at me when someone says something wrong and let that look mean, what it should mean. That's not a lot to ask. I don't know yet if I'll get it, but I've stopped pretending the asking isn't necessary. My son-in-law called me last week, not about anything serious. He just asked if I wanted to come out in the spring and help him build a raised bed garden for his wife. She'd mentioned she wanted one, and he wasn't sure he knew what he was doing, and he thought I might. I told him I'd think about it. I probably will.